Within this video, we'll be looking at how to do the first step in designing your database. Now, when you open up Microsoft Access, it might look slightly different to you depending on the version that you're using. I'm using the most updated version as of 2021. So what you need to look for is you need to look for the blank database option. So I'm just going to double click on that. And then you're going to give it a name. Now, the example we're going to use throughout this video series is we're going to create a very simple game catalog system. So I'm going to call this My Games, and then press create. You can also select here on the folder where you'd like it to store it to. By default, it goes to your documents folder in Windows. Now, at first, it kind of looks like a sort of similar version to Excel, but it's quite different. Now, first thing we need to do in Microsoft Access is create the tables. In the example here, we're going to have 3 tables. Those are customer, order, and games. Now, one of the powers of having a relational database like this piece of software is that we can store data around categories, which makes the data much easier to store, but much more efficient to search and sort. And this will become more familiar as we go through the series. So first thing we're going to do is I'm going to show you different views. So if you go to view in the top left-hand corner, you've got the data sheet view, which is where the data is shown inside the table, and design view. So the first view you want to go to is go design view. You have to give it a table name. So I'm going to call it customer. Now, if you would like to, inside the YouTube description, I have provided a worksheet that has all the information inside this. Once you've selected the table name, press OK. Now, by default, you have an auto number. Now, IDs become very important inside relational databases. The reason for this is that every single record, which means item stored in a table, needs to have a unique ID. And the reason for this is so we can search and sort it. Think of it like how you have a license ID or student ID. That is a unique way of referencing you because maybe, for example, there are 2 people at a school that have the same name as you. So we're just going to change this to custom ID. I'm going to leave it as an auto number. Now the good thing about auto number is that it automatically will generate and keep track of numbers. Now you can change this if you'd like to, but be very careful that you make sure that this field stays unique. You've got the optional description here. Now the description is something I would usually go through in my class. It's really important to have a description inside here as it lets future people modifying the database know what the field's purpose is. Now for the purpose of this video, we're going to keep it blank for time reasons. So I'm going to put in some more fields. So these fields will be related around a customer's ID. Okay, so once you've entered those different types of fields in, you'll notice that there's a data type here. Now it's really important when we work with databases that you put the correct type of data in. And we call this data validation. The reason behind this is if you put wrong data in, obviously you may be storing information that's not relevant, or at worst case it might cause issues further down the track. Now by default you'll keep short text. Now if you select the drop down, short text from memory is less than 255 characters, which is basically anything including text, numbers, special characters. You got long text if you need to store anything longer than that, larger than that, and you've got these different options here. Now I'll give you a chance to play around with that in your own time, but basically you got the most common ones would be like number, currency, and probably date. So we'll go through and modify those. So first and last name of short text, date join we'd like to have as a date time. In the bottom here, under the general sort of table, you got further options which we'll look at in the future video, but you can actually also select the format here. And if you select the drop down, you can select whether you want a short, medium, long format, do you want American format, and so on. But we'll leave it as the default there. Address we'll leave as text, and we'll change postcode because in Australia our postcode is number based, and also we will change phone to number. So that's looking pretty good. Now at this point here you can either save it, which is Control S or the save icon depending on your option. But what will happen now is we're going to create the other 2 tables which are order and games. So the way you create a new table is you go to create in the top menu, and under the ribbon there you have different options there, and we're creating a simple table. Now we're going to repeat the same process we did for customer, which is go to view, select the drop down, go to design. We're going to this time call it order, press OK, and I'm going to put in the fields that are needed for the order table. Okay, so I've entered those fields in there. As you can see, I've got a couple of different IDs here, which will make more sense as we go through the relationship section in the future. But the idea is that inside a relational database such as Access, we need to make sure that every table has a unique ID. And here it's called the order ID. You go through and check the data types. So we'll make sure our IDs are numbers. You notice that I'm leaving the first ID for the table as order number, changing these ones to number. It'll make more sense in a future video. The last step is to create the last table, which is games. So we go back to the create option in the menu. We select under the ribbon table, and then as we change the option over again, design view, we can now call this, put our game fields in. Okay, so we put the fields in for game. As we go through the data types, the only thing that really needs to be changed is probably going to be our price, which we'll set as currency. You can see down here you can change the options there if you'd like to. And then we're also going to change our date release to a date time. Now, a couple of rules when working with tables is if you want to populate them, so for example, if I go to datasheet view, I can actually manually enter the data here like so. It's not recommended. It can be done for small scale databases, but my advice to you is to follow the videos and then create a form. Once you create a form, it's much easier to update, remove data in your tables. However, it can be done manually here. So for example, if I go to customer and change it to the datasheet view, it will always ask you to save if you change it. I can then manually put in details if I would like to. As I said, it's not probably the best way to do it, as there are better ways to work with this. So that's pretty much in a nutshell how tables work. So it's really important that the first step is when you design your database is you create the tables based around what are the main elements inside your proposed database. And the best way to work that is to look at the scenario, work out what data you're collecting, then group the fields under common headings like we've done here under customer, games and order.